Okay, guys, what we're going to do here is review the civil rights movement and contemporary America. Why did I choose a image from a protest in Seattle, Washington? Any ideas? Why an NAACP protest in Seattle, Washington? Yeah, I want you guys to think about the fact that racism and civil rights is a problem across the country. It wasn't just a Southern problem during the civil rights movement. All right, so civil rights are achieved by interpreting, basically the Supreme Court interpreting their powers broadly. Much of this occurs during the Earl Warren Court, appointed by Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the Supreme Court during the Warren Court is going to reshape American society in the 1950s and 60s, and much of those civil rights will continue under the Burger Court in the 1970s. The significance of the Supreme Court in the case Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The Supreme Court decision desegregated schools that were unequal, and it overturned what ruling from 1896? It threw out which one? What's our 1896 case? Talked about it earlier.
Just now?
Mm-hmm.
Brown versus the Board of Education?
Yeah, but it threw this case out from 1896.
Oh,
Plessy v. Ferguson, very good. And also, the Brown case included the Dorothy Davis case in Virginia. Davis versus the County School Board of Prince Edward County. So, Linda Brown, a young girl, primary school age, was not allowed to attend a white school in Topeka, Kansas, near her home. Dorothy Davis and the kids of Moton High School in Farmville, Virginia, in Prince Edward County went on strike to protest the segregated schools in Farmville. Moton was the school that they were attending. They wanted to be able to attend the brand new all-white school that had been built in Farmville. So here on the left we have an image of a mother and daughter. This is not Linda Brown. They're on the steps of the Supreme Court after the court ruled in favor of the Brown family to desegregate schools. And here we have the monument of the Davis case at the Virginia State Capitol. It seemed like reaching for the moon. Quote from Barbara Johns, one of the Moton School kids who went on strike with Dorothy Davis. Here we have the victorious defense team in the Brown case, May 17th, 1954. The guy that you all must know is Thurgood Marshall. He's the lead on the legal defense team for the Brown case. He'll also become the first African American to sit where, guys? Thurgood Marshall becomes the first African American to sit on the what court? Supreme Court. Nice job. How did Virginia and the South respond to the Brown and Davis decisions? Massive resistance, closing schools, for example. How many years did Prince Edward shut their schools down for? 5 years. Good. So they shut them down. The establishment of private academies, like we talked about Southampton Academy in Southampton, Virginia, Richmond Christian here locally. How about white flight from urban school systems? Give me an example of white flight in the Metro Richmond area. Okay, I talked about some high schools like George Wythe and Huguenot. Those schools, folks left that area and they move into Chesterfield County, and they're going to establish schools in the 60s and 70s One school in particular, if you look in the early years, was Lloyd C. Byrd, that a large number of white families and white students are going to come into the suburbs of Chesterfield. What are some other white flight cities that we talked about? One significantly in Georgia. One in Georgia. Nobody can give me an example of a city in Georgia that participated in white flight? How about the capital of the state of Georgia? Atlanta. Thank you very much. Good job. So Richmond and Atlanta became two prime examples of white flight during this era. Here we have an example of massive resistance on the left and massive resistance on the right. All right, so we've got the roles of individuals in the demise of segregated schools. Thurgood Marshall, NAACP legal defense team in the Brown case on the left, and Oliver Hill on the right, NAACP legal defense team in Virginia. Where did both of these guys go to law school together? Howard, very good. Nice job. Here's the other side of the statue commemorating the Davis case of the Virginia State Capitol. The legal system can force open doors and sometimes even knock down walls, but it cannot build bridges. The job belongs to you and me. Justice Thurgood Marshall. African Americans working through the court system and mass protest reshaped public opinion and secured the passage of civil rights legislation. The influence of the 1963 March on Washington had a dramatic effect on public opinion about civil rights. Notably, this is the largest march. Nearly how many people were there? Thousands of people. Nearly 1 million people at this march. Remember, participants in this march came from all segments. It wasn't just Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was members of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Congress on Racial Equality, Nation of Islam. There's a number of others, but here we have participants were inspired that were and were not affiliated with a particular civil rights movement with Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. What's significant about what we're doing here in relation to Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech? What do we got going on in this room? Yeah, we've got a integrated, diverse educational opportunity. That is what Dr. King wanted to achieve in the I Have a Dream speech. Not just in education, but in society. The march helped influence public opinion to support civil rights legislation, which will lead to the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65 and the passage of the 24th Amendment. The march demonstrated the power of nonviolent mass protest. Is Dr. King our first nonviolent protester? No. Will he be the last? Yeah? Yeah. No. We still have nonviolent protests going on. Here's an image of the March on Washington, August 28th, 1963, from atop the Lincoln Memorial. Here we have Dr. King on the left and on the right giving the I Have a Dream speech. How the legislative process advanced the cause of civil rights for African Americans. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, and gender. It desegregated public accommodations. President Lyndon B. Johnson played an important role in the passage of the act. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 outlawed literacy tests. Federal registrars were sent to the South to register voters. It increased African American voters, and President Lyndon B. Johnson played an important role in the passage of this act. We'll also see a subsequent Civil Rights Act passed to limit discrimination in renting and buying homes, And what is important about the 24th Amendment? What does it do for voting? It gets rid of what? Where you don't have to pay to vote any longer. What is that called?
Where you don't have to pay to vote.
Does anybody remember? Nobody? It's called a poll tax. So the 24th Amendment gets rid of the poll tax. Here we have Lyndon B. Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law. You can see Dr. King standing behind him. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, advanced the civil rights of African Americans by challenging segregation in the courts, established in 1909, who was one of our leading founders that we go back to, who wanted equality in education. W.B. Du Bois, very good. W.B. Du Bois, or Dubois. Hey. The More You Know, Plessy v. Ferguson, was adopted separate but equal segregation laws, a.k.a. Jim Crow. Brown v. Board will overturn or repeal Plessy and Jim Crow laws, and Plessy upheld Jim Crow for 58 years. Unbelievable. All right, we're going to pump the brakes real quick.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yep. All right, back to it here. Looking at contemporary America. We've got NASA on the left. Remember that Sputnik is going to...
Did you finish this? Okay, good.
Sputnik is going to spearhead that under Eisenhower and Kennedy. We've got Dr. Jonas Salk here in the middle. And we have Sally Ride here on the right. Salk comes up with the vaccine for polio, and Sally Ride, our first female astronaut. All right, changes in the U.S. Supreme Court. The membership of the Supreme Court has included women and minorities such as Sandra Day O'Connor, our first woman on the court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, first Jewish justice, second woman on the court, Clarence Thomas, second African American after Thurgood Marshall. In the Obama administration, Sonia Sotomayor, first Latina, third woman, and Elena Kagan, second Jewish justice, fourth woman. So the court has become very diverse in the last 40 years. The United States Supreme Court protects the individual rights enumerated or given in the Constitution of the United States. The United States Supreme Court identifies a constitutional basis for a right to privacy that is protected from government interference. The U.S. Supreme Court invalidates legislative acts, meaning laws made, and executive actions by presidents that the justices agree exceed the authority granted to government officials by the Constitution of the United States. The civil rights movement of the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s provided a model that other groups have used to extend civil rights and promote equal justice. So we've talked about that in the Brown case, Brown v. Board of Topeka, Davis v. Board of Prince Edward County, Civil Rights Acts of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65. This is the current court. We have Justice Clarence Thomas, Antonin Scalia, who's recently was just passed away, Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Anthony Kennedy, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Breyer, Justice Alito, and Justice Kagan. 21st century immigration in the United States. New immigrant groups have increased American diversity and redefined American identity. New and increasing immigration in the United States has been taking place for many diverse countries, especially Asian, Latin American countries, in this third and fourth wave of immigration in the last 40 years. Reasons for immigration, same issues that go all the way back to colonial America: political freedom, economic opportunity, religious freedom. Here we have the uprising of following the collapse of the financial markets in 2002 in Argentina. Some of the key effects of immigration: bilingual education, English as a second language programs. We have strong ESOL programs in this county. Effects on public policy, Cuban Americans and policy toward Cuba, and we're going to see those U.S.-Cuban relations improve as we move forward. Politics and voting, people like to be part of the democratic process. Issues related to immigration policy: strain on government services, filling low-paying jobs in the U.S., border issues, not just with Mexico, but also with Canada and port authorities on the East Coast and West Coast and in the Gulf. Pathway to citizenship, bilingual education, speaking more than one language, and some of the increasing cultural diversity have led to contributions like diversity in music, visual arts, literature, increased roles in the labor force, achievements in science, engineering, education, healthcare, etc. Technological developments have led to the growth of the U.S. space program in contemporary America. In the early 1960s, President John F. Kennedy pledged increased support for the American space program. The race to the moon continued through the 1960s, and we see NASA grow under the leadership of Kennedy. U.S. astronaut John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. American astronaut Neil Armstrong was the first person to step onto the moon's surface in 1969. He proclaimed in this Apollo mission, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Sally Ride became our first female astronaut. And over the past 3 decades, improved technology and media have brought about better access to communication and information for rural areas, businesses, and individual consumers. As a result, many more Americans have access to global information and viewpoints. Neil Armstrong on the left, and John Glenn on the right.
You copy and paste it. The largest is I checked your whole Google Drive and it wasn't in there.
Time magazine, we see the American astronaut winning the space race.
Yeah, it's not in there.
Neil Armstrong and the lunar landing. And now I put a logo of SpaceX. We're starting to see our space program becoming more privatized now, becoming more part of the free market economy, working with the federal government. Technological advances as a result of the space race. More Americans now have access to global information and viewpoints. Cable television, 24-hour news. CNN was the first, and now we have multiple outlets. Personal computers, Mac or PCs. All of you guys in this room have some form of a PC or a Mac in front of you. Cellular phones, we've all got them. They've become essentially our personal computers. Calling and texting has become a part of our life. And the World Wide Web and the Internet have allowed us to gain information very quickly. Changes in work, school, and healthcare. We've got telecommuting, people working from home. How many people out there have family members that are telecommuters?
Parents that work from home?
Yeah. Distance learning, online classes. How many people out there have taken an online class? Nobody yet? Okay, you will. Those of you, you guys are college bound, so you're gonna end up taking some online education. You got growth in white collar careers, more office work, outsourcing and offshoring, meaning taking jobs, services, factories, and business outside of the United States. But you can also outsource within a business. Like you might get rid of a certain department and outsource their labor to a contractor to try to bring the price down. One thing that gets outsourced in almost every phase of a project is building a home, because different contractors are doing different style of work. Okay. One thing that's significant for outsourcing and offshoring is the trade deals that are negotiated in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s with China, Mexico, Canada, and a number of other countries. Vietnam is another, as a result of the end of the Cold War and the expansion of the global economy. Breakthroughs in medical research include the development of the vaccine for polio by Dr. Jonas Salk. What is also remarkable at this period of time, the end of smallpox. The last confirmed case of smallpox is going to be in the late 1970s. The Reagan Revolution. Ronald Reagan's policies had an impact on the relationship between the federal and state government. Reagan was all about giving the states rights, backing the 10th Amendment, the States' Rights Amendment. The conservative political philosophy of President Reagan prompted a reevaluation of the size and role of the government in the economy and society of contemporary America. Some programs were cut, taxes were cut dramatically, but military spending was expanded. President Reagan and the conservative Republicans advocated for tax cuts and Reaganomics, also known as supply-side economics, or also known as trickle-down economics. Opponents called it voodoo economics. Transfer of responsibilities to state governments. Appointment of judges and justices who exercise judicial restraint. This encourages judges to limit the exercise of their own power. A couple examples of those would be Sandra Day O'Connor and Anton Scalia, both appointed by Reagan. The reduction in the number and scope of government programs and regulations, and the strength of the American military through the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, also known as Star Wars, not the movie. The Reagan Revolution extended beyond his tenure in office with the election of his Vice President, George H.W. Bush, the election of a centrist, moderate Democrat, William Bill Clinton, the Republican sweep of congressional elections and state houses in the 1990s, and the election of George W. Bush, son of George H.W. Bush, as president. All right, we'll pump the brakes. Let me know if you got... All right, so the government and the economy as a result of the Reagan Revolution. The federal government has the ability to influence the United States economy. It bases its decisions on economic indicators such as gross domestic product. So, like, what's a big GDP for Virginia? Has been all the way back to Jamestown. Tobacco. Good job, guys. Nice job. Exchange rates, like exchanging our money. Like during 07-08, if you were going to try to exchange $1 for a British pound, you would have been spending $2 American for every 1 British pound. Now it's leveled back out. Just recently. Rate of inflation. Where did we see in the 70s inflation get into? What percentage? Meaning the value of the dollar was not as strong. In the teens. Good job. All right? Into the teens. Are we still worried about inflation? Always. Yeah. Unemployment rates. In the 07-08 housing crisis. We saw unemployment rates go up, but as of late, we've started to see unemployment rates go down in some areas and start to level off in some states. So remember, we're always looking at these factors because we want to stay out of the bad R and D word. What is that? We're getting out of this recession, and we certainly don't want to ever get in a depression. Good. All right. Government promotes a healthy economy characterized by full employment and low inflation through the following actions. The Federal Reserve. Does anybody remember the president that established the Federal Reserve way back in 1913 with the New Freedom Program? Last Virginia-born president. Woodrow Wilson. Good job. So they determine our monetary policy decisions, they control the money supply, and they control credit. This affects everybody. Everybody in here has money, right? Does everybody in here have credit? You will, right? You will have credit. The Fed also wants to expand or contract economic growth because they want the market to be stable. President and Congress, they make fiscal policy decisions, determine levels of government taxation and spending. Government regulates the economy by trying to balance a what? Trying to balance a starts with a B. Budget. Good job. Nice. All right. International terrorism. The United States responses to terrorism heightened security at home following the events of September 11th, 2001, the attacks by Al-Qaeda on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Diplomatic and military initiatives took place in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and it established the Patriot Act, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism act in 2001. This means that the National Security Administration can do what? They can run surveillance, right? They can tap your phone. They can check your email. They can follow you on social media. How do you guys feel about that? Some of you don't like it. Who does like it? Okay. So we've got some people that like it, some people that don't like it. Why do you like it? Awesome. Basically what I was about to say, give up a little bit of freedom to prevent future terrorist attacks. So who out there doesn't like it? Somebody said, I don't like it. Tell us why. Invasion of privacy. Good. All right, cool. So this is one of the most debated pieces of domestic policy in the last 20 years. It'll also establish the Department of Homeland Security. Good job. Nice job. Here we have the devastating attack on the Pentagon on the left, bottom left, and the World Trade Center on the right on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Labor force diversity. You don't need to write any of these notes down because they're provided on the course Edmodo page. Women have altered the traditional world of work. An increasingly large percentage of women in the American labor force since the 1970s has grown, as you can see there on the right. You can see the chart of the growth of women in the labor force from 1950 to 2000. Many working mothers since the 1980s, like my own. Thank you, Mom, for providing for my sister and I. Women in non-traditional jobs like medicine and law. Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman to serve on the United States Supreme Court. Sally Ride was the first female astronaut in the United States in the NASA program. And obviously the role of the courts, the Supreme Court notably, have provided more opportunity for women through the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title IX for women in higher education. Any of you ladies out there want to potentially go to law school, get a master's degree, or go to med school? Anybody? Awesome. Okay. Hey, and good thing about it, if you end up going in the Navy, you'll be able to take advantage of the GI Bill. Get them to pay for college. All right, any questions about women in the labor force? Yeah, go for it. Issues concerning working women in the 1970s and 80s. Need for affordable daycare. Equality in pay. Are women still fighting for equitable pay? You bet. Yes. Notably, did anybody follow the U.S. women's soccer team? Just recently came out to receive equal pay to the men's soccer team. The pink collar ghetto, which is not really a term used much anymore, but it was in reference to low prestige, low paying jobs. So like the pink collar ghetto was women being stuck in what types of services? You guys might, did somebody say secretary? Okay. Yeah. We probably don't even think about that anymore, but there's a period of time where women, it was like, oh, you want to get an education, learn how to type or learn how to clean. That was where women were directed to go, and now all that's changed. But it's only happened in the last 30 to 40 years. It's kind of crazy to think. Virginia public universities weren't accepting women until the 1970s in most co-ed colleges. The glass ceiling, the perception that career advancement for women is not equal to men. Women start breaking through the glass ceiling. Women start becoming chief operating officers of companies throughout 80s, 90s, and that's grown in the last 2 decades. And then there's a political cartoon. It's sort of a satire of the lack of equal pay. It says gender gap in wages, and the guy says 3/4 of a penny for your thoughts because of that 20-25% pay gap. Space race technology in the late 20th century and in the millennium, space exploration, the space shuttle program in the 80s and 90s, the Mars rover, which is pictured there on the right, the Voyager missions, the Hubble telescope. Has anybody seen pictures from Hubble? They're incredible. I got one for you coming up. Communications, the reason that you're able to communicate the way you are on your iPhones, Androids, and tablets is thanks to the space race. Improved satellites, global positioning systems. How many people use GPS? Just one person? Everybody's used GPS, right? Type in your Google Maps. Personal communication devices, which, how many iPhone users? Just 2 of us? Only 2 iPhones? How many Droid users? All right, so it's about half and half. And then obviously the growth in robotics programs. On the left here we have the shuttle program. On the top right, that's the Hubble telescope. Look at that picture from Hubble of the galaxy. Isn't that incredible? That's awesome. And they're looking to improve images beyond the galaxy as we speak. That may be happening in the next decade. Very cool. Changes in work, school, and health care in recent decades. Telecommuting, online coursework, your iPhones and your Androids allow you to do those things. Growth in the service industries. How many people in here want to go into healthcare? You will probably do well, because why is the healthcare industry so big right now? People get sick. They need help, right? And there's another thing to think about. The boomer generation and the millennial generation are huge. And there's a lot of them that need a lot of health care. And they're living longer. Breakthroughs in medical research, including improved medical diagnostics and imaging technologies. What is that machine? MRI machine. Good job. Well done. That's an MRI machine. And then, of course, we have the outsourcing and the offshoring, moving jobs and businesses and services out of the country as a result of a lot of trade deals that have happened since the 1970s, starting with Nixon's visit to China in '72, all the way through Clinton's NAFTA agreement with Mexico and Canada. But remember, outsourcing can be done locally as well. The Obama years, most recent. The main goal is and was to change the American healthcare system, elected in '08 and '12. Forced with a major economic crisis that was caused by the collapse of the American housing market and a near collapse of the global banking system, caused high rates of unemployment, led to the stimulus package being passed. That is one of the most debated economic policies in recent years. Furthermore, the bank bailouts as a result of the collapse of the housing market. Ending the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Uprisings in North Africa. Egyptian and Libyan conflicts, and the death of Osama bin Laden. Dealing with problems in North Korea, potential missile launch sites, and genocide. Iran, nuclear threats on Israel. Syria, civil war, and the rise of ISIS. And Russia and Ukraine with control of Crimea. You also have NSA leaks under Edward Snowden that have been a focal point of concern in both generations. And you have the appointment of two justices on the Supreme Court in Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. You guys have any questions? All right, guys. Nothing at all out there? All right. Good job. Thank you.